Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. So can you give Madana-mohan Prabhu this microphone?
Here. I've got one here.
Oh, okay, sure.
May I remain here in this place?
Yeah, sure.
Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Krishtaya Bhutaneshna Matya Bhakti Vedanta Swami Nityanamane Namaste Saraswati Deva Gauravani Pracharini Nirvishesha Shunyavani Paschata Deshatarine. Well, thank you so much, Maharaj, for this very absorbing pastimes of Srila Prabhupada. Just like the example you gave about the chataka bird that cannot be and wouldn't be satisfied with anything except the rainwater. In the same way, devotees of Srila Prabhupada, his immediate disciples, and also the disciples of his disciples down that line, are not satisfied with any source of inspiration in their spiritual lives except something that either comes from Srila Prabhupada directly through his books, or through his lectures, bhajans, or through the mouths of his disciples who carry his message. And they're kind of very similar in terms of the function to clouds. Like in the 6th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, when Ajamila is confronted with Yamadutas who came to take his life out of his body, then he, of course, as we know, involuntarily chanted the name of Narayana, meaning to call his youngest son, and then the 4 Vishnadutas appeared. And the interesting description in the Bhagavatam depicts them as carrying, they're called Vasudevokta Karinaha. They're the carriers of Lord Vasudeva's message, Vasudeva Ukta Karina, and they carry out his orders. And then the last line of the description says, Megha Nirhradaya Gira. They are rumbling, just their voices were as thunderous, as sonorous as those of, as the sound of thunder. Megha Nirhradaya Gira. And Srila Prabhupada's voice, as devotees recall, as we can ourselves hear quite well in his recordings, is that kind of deep, not in a vocal sense, even though it was also deep in that vocal sense, but deep with the unfathomable instruction, not wisdom. Wisdom is too shallow a word to describe the voice of Srila Prabhupada. As we just read recently in Durban in the temple, in one of the classes, Srila Prabhupada writes in the 4th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, he says the sound of a pure devotee's voice is transcendently powerful, and because it carries the saffron particles of Lord Krishna's lotus feet. Lord Krishna always dances on the pure devotee's tongue, and then his feet shake off or give off those saffron particles of mercy. And then the verse Prithu Maharaj says they get carried by the sound vibrations of a pure devotee's voice, and then these vibrations, his words, don't even have to be words. It could be just sounds of his voice. Sometimes, as we remember, Srila Prabhupada would just make some indistinct sounds, like of approval or of disapproval, chastisement or happiness. But even those indistinct words, which cannot be formally categorized as Krishna Katha, still, when they enter the ears of devotees, or any people actually for that matter, those saffron particles go right to the heart and change a person's consciousness. So the Prabhupada explains that the words of pure devotee, his voice, not just the words, but the voice of pure devotee is transcendently potent, and is capable of waking up a person to his or her true spiritual life, just like an alarm clock. It doesn't really matter what kind of a ringtone you have on your alarm clock, it has to be audible. And so the same manner when we speak about or hear about Prabhupada's stories, his voice or the way he dealt with his disciples, female disciples and male disciples, we can understand through these narrations that Srila Prabhupada was no less of a carrier messenger of Lord Krishna, potent with the words of Krishna and his compassion. Srila Prabhupada explains in Caitanya Charitamrita that an acharya or pure devotee is called sometimes ashraya vigraha, which means the form of the Lord one has to take shelter of. In other words, Krishna manifests himself in this world through his pure devotees, and it's only through them we can be noticed by Krishna, and only through them we can also understand what Krishna wants us to do and who he wants us to be. And when we hear about these ways Prabhupada dealt with his disciples, there could be different stories. Some of them are humorous, some of them are almost like they almost make us faint because they're so, I would imagine, stressful for those devotees who were the subject of his chastisement and anger, like Mother Lakshmi, you just quoted that story. But the outcome of all these ways Prabhupada treated his disciples was the same. They became not just Krishna conscious, but somehow they would fall in love with him more and more. So there was some special quality of his mercy, a special quality of his anger, which is another form of mercy, that it would endear all of Prabhupada to all of his disciples, because they could see that his words and the way he treated them was coming through very deep love and compassion. Like Srila Prabhupada writes in one of his letters to, it was Umapati Prabhu, one of the first Prabhupada's disciples. I think he was in the first batch, 11 of 11 devotees who were initiated, and out of those 11, one was lady, Janaki and Devi, and the rest, the other 10 were men. And they kind of wandered off with another disciple of Srila Prabhupada. They wanted to establish their own community, assume the title of acharyas, I guess, and somehow it didn't work out so well. And then Srila Prabhupada wrote a letter, which I oftentimes remember. I actually have it here with me. I'm tempted to quote it verbatim, but maybe I could just repeat the paraphrase that when he wrote to Umapati after they came back. He said, "When you left us, I cried with tears in my eyes, lamenting my inability to save you, because once a connection with the spiritual master is made through initiation and surrender, can never be broken, and the spiritual master takes it as his lifetime responsibility to deliver the disciple. So if the disciple, influenced by Maya, misunderstands the motives of his spiritual master and goes off and leaves the spiritual path, then the spiritual master, lamenting his own inability to save that disciple, just cries with tears in his eyes. That's what I did," Prabhupada wrote to him. "And now you're back. So I'm happy that you came back, and I wish you all success in your spiritual life." So there are so many stories like that. Prabhupada shows his, again, the word humane doesn't do justice to the emotions of a pure devotee. He sees all of his disciples as Krishna's eternal associates in the spiritual world, and his words, they're just like chisels. Sometimes, like a sculptor, he takes a slab of stone and then chips away all the unnecessary extra. Like once Michelangelo was a famous sculptor, and he was asked how he managed to create such masterpieces out of slabs of stone, and he said, "Well, it's very easy. Just take a slab of stone and then chip away everything unnecessary, and then what's left is a sculpture." So Prabhupada did that with his words and his actions. He chipped away at devotees' Maya and their illusions and their resistance and ability to follow spiritual path. But he also reminded us that he actually created that ability to follow the spiritual path. if it were not for Srila Prabhupada, we wouldn't have been, I can safely, confidently say that about myself. Maybe some of you, most of you, all of you would have been just fine in your spiritual lives. Who knows, but people from the West, we know who we are and who we were. But Srila Prabhupada, by his words, he manages to create that ability to, and the desire to serve Krishna. It can only be compared to Lord Caitanya Mahaprabhu's own potency when, as Prabhupada describes, just by his touch or his glance, or the sound of his name, or just the aroma of his lotus feet, or the dust that was raised by the devotees of Lord Caitanya, when it would just be carried by the wind and would precipitate on someone's head and become pure devotees. So Srila Prabhupada, I think, has the same potency somehow. Whoever would look at Srila Prabhupada, whoever Prabhupada would look at, they would become devotees. Just like that young man, I think it was, I'm pretty sure it was Giriraj Maharaj, but just to be on the safe side, I won't claim that as a 100% certain fact. He was a young man and he came to our Hare Krishna temple in America because his friend invited him, and he didn't really want to go. He was not into religion, he was a kind of an agnostic of sorts or something, but he didn't really want to get into religion. He came and he listened to a class by Prabhupada. Maybe it wasn't a temple, it was the hall, and he didn't like it. And he went back with the firm conviction he would never come back again. But then a thought came to him a few days later. I should go again to that place, to those devotees, that temple, and check it out, just to make sure that I don't want to go back again. And he went, he checked it out, and he was certain that he doesn't want to get involved with that movement, strange people and strange lifestyle. And then the same thought popped up again in his mind a few days later. Why don't I just go there and check out again, just to make 100% sure? Which he did. And then it continued for a while with his experimentation. And then he ended up being shaved up, and donning a dhoti, chanting Hare Krishna mantra and beads. And then Prabhupada came and he looked at him, shaved up with a tilak. And he said, "Oh, you're here. I was praying for you." I thought, well, such a nice man. Such a nice young man, why doesn't he become a devotee? And Krishna fulfills desires of his pure devotee, something that he himself wouldn't have done. Krishna, he does it because a pure devotee wants that to happen. And Prabhupada writes, actually it's in his class, and in Mayapur, in one of his classes, commenting on Prahlada Maharaj's prayers. In one of the prayers, Prahlada Maharaj says, prays to Lord Narasimhadev, asking him to never deprive him of the opportunity to render service to his spiritual master Narada Muni. Narasimhadev offers him an opportunity to go back to the spiritual world, and Prahlada Maharaj says, "Thanks, but no thanks. I'll stay here and I'll serve my Guru Maharaj if you kindly allow." Tava Pritya Parsha. And then Prabhupada gives a lecture on that verse, and one of the very interesting, extremely inspiring episodes in that class, he says, so it's more important to be devotee of Krishna, to be a devotee of Krishna than being a devotee of Krishna directly. Because if a pure devotee of Krishna says something, even if it's wrong, Krishna will fulfill it. Even if it's wrong, then Krishna thinks, well, my devotee promised, it has to be done. And then Prabhupada says, therefore, if a pure devotee tells you, I'll take you to Krishna Loka, Prabhupada says, you must go there. Even Krishna cannot do that. That's his own words. Even Krishna cannot do that. But if a devotee promises you to take you to Krishna Loka in one lifetime for this meager and the kind of very rudimentary, like primary school kind of level spiritual practice of chanting 60 rounds a day and following the Four Equality principles, something that we sometimes even have a hard time with. But Prabhupada promised. He said, if you chant 16 rounds, at least minimum, without offense, if you follow the Four Equality principles, if you read all our books, if you try to preach, preaching means sharing what you have received from from those books with other people, try to make their life as successful, as fortunate as yours, then in one lifetime you'll go. And it's completely impossible. I mean, our Acharyas, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, what he does, he explains that it takes minimum 3 lifetimes. But in one lifetime, one has to be in Vrindavan, chanting at least 64 rounds and never leaving the place, dying there, and then taking birth again in Vrindavan, this time as a resident of Vrindavan. You know those you have been to Vrindavan, and you know those beggars, children who run around teasing you, pulling on your sari or dhoti and asking ektaka, whatever they ask for. This kind of people, they're already at home with Krishna, and then dying again and taking birth again in the universe where Krishna is manifesting his leelas. And then, if we don't screw up things on the way, we don't mess with our spoil our fortune, then we can go to the spiritual world. But Prabhupada changed it all around. He says, no, one lifetime for this, for Krishna, for 16 rounds minimum, for these 4 equality principles, little service to Lord Caitanya Mahaprabhu, I promise you'll go back to the spiritual world. That's only one half of the story. The other half of the story is that Krishna, he asks Krishna, Krishna, please, I know they're incompetent, I know they're hopeless, I know they're useless, I know all that, but you're, as he himself writes in his poem to Krishna on board of the Jaladuta ship, he says, only if you are merciful to them, then their life will become successful. So please make me an instrument in your hands, and not just in your hands, but in the hands of my spiritual master, and then they'll have a hope. And I'm ready to do anything for that, even sacrificing my own life. As Srila Prabhupada once said that I'm ready to die with my boots on, just like a soldier on the battlefield. I don't want to die in Vrindavan. Wherever I preach about Krishna, that's Vrindavan. Somebody was actually offering him, he was planning to go to Moscow, since I'm from Russia, so I must say something about that. And Moscow winters are, you can ask Bhakti Caitanya Maharaj how Moscow winters, or Russian winters. Actually Maharaj was the GBC or AGBC, co-GBC for Siberia for quite some time, a couple of decades I think. In Siberian winters, which Maharaj fearlessly ventured into every year, are like -30, -35, that's warm.
-46.
46, yeah. That's kind of, you're getting there, -46. And he was going to go to Moscow, and that was winter actually. And then somebody was trying to dissuade him from that plan. He said, no, Prabhupada, let's go to Hawaii. Hawaii is probably the person who told him that he preferred Hawaii over Moscow.
It was Govinda Dasi,
Govinda
and
Dasi.
they were in Hawaii. It's just coming up, the mango season.
Yeah, she said mango season is just coming up, and the mangoes are so sweet. And then Prabhupada retorted, he said, preaching in the snows of Moscow is sweeter than the sweetest of all mangoes. That was his vision. And because of that vision, here we are. So what Maharaj has just explained in those episodes, described of his Srila Prabhupada's treatment of his lady disciples, just one facet of his very compassionate, father-like nature, in which he saw all of his disciples, men or women alike, not just as his disciples, but also as very dear assistants in his mission, who have been sent by Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. That's why he implored them and called on them to step up to the plate and become the next acharyas, the next torchbearers for Lord Chaitanya's movement, and train them equally. As actually Maharaj he started his discussion or description of those pastimes. I don't know but it's Prabhupada anyhow, so how can we be shy about reading Prabhupada's own words and his Chaitanya Charitamrita of all books. And there is a verse, but then Prabhupada's commentary, it sounds a little bit harsh, but again, it's true to Prabhupada's style and his vision. With your permission, Maharaj, may I read one verse from Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita, And that's the Adi Lila 7th chapter, Lord Chaitanya inspired features. And then he says, it's a verse. It's a verse in which Lord Chaitanya, in which Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami explains Lord Chaitanya's thought. Lord Chaitanya thinks, I wanted everyone to be immersed in this inundation of love of Godhead, but some of them, referring to unfortunate people, have escaped. Therefore, I shall devise a trick to drown them also. And I won't read the entire purport, but I will just read the relevant part. Relevant for Maharaja's choice of reading stories about lady disciples of Prabhupada. He says, sometimes jealous people criticize the Krishna consciousness movement because it engages equally both boys and girls in distributing love of Godhead. Not knowing that boys and girls in countries like Europe and America mix very freely, these fools and rascals criticize the boys and girls in Krishna consciousness for intermingling. But these rascals, Prabhupada's own words, he doesn't attach any name to the term, but I guess it's like if the shoe fits, wear it. But these rascals should consider that one cannot suddenly change a community's social customs. However, since both the boys and girls are being trained to become preachers, those girls are not ordinary girls, but are as good as their brothers who are preaching Krishna consciousness. Therefore, to engage both boys and girls in fully transcendental activities is a policy intended to spread the Krishna consciousness movement. These jealous fools who criticize the intermingling of boys and girls will simply have to be satisfied with their own foolishness, because they cannot think of how to spread Krishna consciousness by adopting ways and means that are favorable for this purpose. Their stereotyped methods will never help spread Krishna consciousness. Therefore, though what we are doing is perfect by the grace of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, for it is he who proposed to invent a way to capture those who strayed from Krishna consciousness. So it's very powerful. And Prabhupada captured himself so many girls like Mataji Vishaka Devi, who was again an atheist and a feminist, and she didn't want to accept anyone as an authority in her life. And she writes in this beautiful book, 5 years, 11 months, and what's it, Life Full of Unexpected Love? That's the title of the book. And she writes about how Prabhupada captured her heart from the very beginning of their conversation. You know what Prabhupada told her to capture her heart? Mataji Vishaka. How would you capture the heart of a feminist, atheist, and basically very successful woman who is on her career track, and she doesn't want to bow down to anyone? Prabhupada had a way. She came with her cameras. She was an accomplished photographer with her husband, Buddhi Yadubara Prabhu. And they came to Mumbai because someone referred them to Prabhupada as the authority on things Indian, because they wanted to capture glimpses of traditional India, something spiritual, whatever that might mean. So they came to Prabhupada's quarters in the Takash building, and with cameras, expensive looking cameras, and they asked him, could you please tell us how to go to Vrindavan to make a series of photographs. Prabhupada looked at them, chuckled, and he said, you are foreigners, you don't speak the local language, they will cheat you and they will steal your cameras. So that was, and she was completely won over, she writes, by those words, because he sounded, visibly he was elevated, he was glowing, and he was effulgent, and he was very aristocratic and very profound personality. She could see that as a photographer. But then what he spoke to them sounded so matter-of-factly down to earth and kind of relatable, and she could understand this is a person I would really love to surrender. Maybe I won't be able to. And then the whole book depicts her, documents her journey to becoming Srila Prabhupada's faithful disciple. And by her grace now we have so many wonderful pictures of Prabhupada through her eyes. And another story, I'm sorry Maharaj, I'm probably rambling on for too long.
One more.
Was about, which one should I tell? Was about Yamuna Devi, another wonderful, legendary Prabhupada's disciple, who, of all different services, she liked to cook. Prabhupada. She was probably the best in ISKCON at that time. And Prabhupada developed a language, a special language, gesture language, to indicate to her how he rated her cooking on that particular occasion. So once Baba Tarini Devi, the sister of Srila Prabhupada, who looked just like Prabhupada, dressed in a sari. That's when they first saw her in Mayapur. She was in white sari with the thick rims, glasses with thick rims, and someone, I don't remember who that was. Maybe it was Yamuna Devi. She wondered, why did Prabhupada put on a sari? Because her face was very similar to Prabhupada's features, the same kind of lips and the nose and the ears and the eyelids and everything. And then she looked closer and she understood it was not Prabhupada. So, and she came to Prabhupada in Vrindavan, and Yamuna Devi really wanted to please her with a Bengali feast. So she went to the market and got the flour, the rice, the dal, all the ingredients that Prabhupada had taught her to use for cooking. And she put together the most opulent and the most intricately cooked feast, Bengali feast. She really tried hard to please. So Prabhupada and she served it, offered and served. And Prabhupada, as I said, she writes, actually it was Dina Tarini, who got sister, she wrote that book about Yamuna Devi. So Prabhupada had a language of gestures, gesture language. If he would just rub his stomach like that after completing the meal, that meant that the meal was kind of nice. He was pleased. That was the lowest mark she would ever get. He would always be satisfied. If he rubbed his chest, that means it was very good, it was excellent. If he was making cutting gestures like across his throat, that meant that was superb. Then the next level was when he would motion his hand above his head like that. Means like far out, I don't know. Unexplicable. You cannot, no words to explain. And she would get, a few times she would get that kind of assessment. But when she served that feast, and Prabhupada he didn't say a word. He emptied all these katoris with prasadam, and then he piled them up in a sort of pyramid, one atop the other. And he looked at Yamuna, who expectantly was waiting for his assessment, and he just knocked it down with a flick of his fingers. Like, I don't know what's the word in English that could describe that emotion. It was a knockout. Something like that. I guess that's what Prabhupada indicated. That's it. Perfect. But then, of course, Yamuna Devi, sorry Maharaj, this one. Because sometimes not that she was ever proud. Prabhupada told her, whatever you learn, immediately teach someone else, because otherwise you'll become proud. And that's what she did. She would teach devotees how to sing, how to cook, how to dress the deities, so many other things, how to clean. And there was a competition between Yamuna and Srila Prabhupada in terms of cleaning. Prabhupada let her clean his rooms, and he demanded expected meticulous, impeccable cleanliness after the cleaning session. And Yamuna was trying to get every single speck of dust she could find. And Prabhupada would come and he would inspect his rooms, his quarters after the cleaning. So once he came and he ran his finger across the table and there was no dust, and Yamuna was very happy. And he ran his finger underneath the table. There was no dust, and she was even happier. Then he opened the drawer and ran his finger inside the drawer, along the edges. You know that pesky dust when it gets into some crevices and you don't expect it to be there, but it's there. So Prabhupada ran his little finger across all these cracks and everything, and there was nothing there. There was nothing there. And Yamuna was elated, and she looked as if she was like a copper vessel, freshly cleaned herself. And Prabhupada took out a stapler out of his drawer, opened the stapler, and put his little finger inside the stapler, and drew it, and then showed there was some dust. And she showed it to her and said, "Useless. You are useless." And he explained that the duty of the spiritual master to find fault with his disciple, so he doesn't feel that he's already perfect. So that was like a few stories. Maharaj, with your permission, I can finish it, can I?
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much. Really nice.